Sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you guys were getting your recording started.
Yeah. Transmission error.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Give me the cue. All right, we good?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm 100% ready to go. Yeah.
All right, man.
Introduce him.
I got it, baby. This is the Democratic Socialist Libertarian, DemSoLib. I'm with Steven Bonnell. He has a very successful YouTube channel, Destiny. We are talking free speech. But before we get into it, Steven, could you just tell us a little bit about your channel in case anybody comes in from my portal or somebody just discovers this randomly on the internet? Just, what you're about if in case, they dig what you're saying.
So I stream on Twitch under Destiny is my name. I play either like random variety games or we do like political or philosophical discussions. If you're watching my YouTube channel, it's mostly politics centered. I think there's more of that than gaming stuff. And I guess you would describe my political views as probably like a social democrat. And then on social issues, I lean like very far left. So some would consider me like an SJW or very progressive.
All right. That's a triggering word.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So just backstory a little bit. Previously, I had heard you having a debate with free speech, on free speech with some other dude. The gist of it was he was coming out for free speech. You seemed to be for some restrictions on social media platforms. You had some comments about democracy, about Americans in general. But getting back to the free speech end, I was a little surprised by your view due to the fact that you're a YouTube content creator and speech is a large part of your medium. So that's what got me into it. Now, I don't want to speak for you. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm, misinterpreting it or misrepresenting it. Why don't you give me your view of free speech? Is like a Goldilocks scenario? Is there too much, too little? Is it just right? I'm speaking primarily about social media platforms.
So like, are you asking me if I'm content with the current state of free speech?
Yeah, where do you see in real time? Where are we at now?
There's like three different levels, I think, of speech to analyze. You've got like, where does it exist on the legal level? Where does it exist on like the like practical level? So like, how do companies regulate it? And then like, where is it kind of like on the moral level, like in society? Like, what are people okay with? I think on the legal level, in terms of like what's defined by free speech in the United States, I'm pretty happy with that. Like, I don't like the idea of the government as much like coming in and telling us like, what can we say? What can't we say? I think that's a really scary road to go down. In terms of on the practical level, so like how are corporations regulating things? I think we're probably in an okay area. Like, it seems like there's plenty of room for a lot of different types of speech right now. And mainstream media publications, we've got people like Fox News and CNN. Online publications, we've got the New York Times and the Daily Wire. And then when it comes to YouTube, we've got left-leaning people like either me or ContraPoints or Sean and Jen or whatever. And you've got like the Steven Crowders, the Sargon of Akkads, the Ben Shapiros. So on the practical level, it seems like we're at an okay spot at the moment. And then personally, in terms of like what we accept as freedom of speech in society, I mean, like people are in insane battles for that. People on the left, I think, probably take it way too far in terms of what they want to get rid of. People on the right, I think, take it way too far in terms of what they want to keep. So, I don't know. I think that right now I would hesitantly say I'm okay with the level of free speech that we have in American society today, like in America and then on the internet in America. It's a little different for other countries, of course, but yeah, I think it's roughly where I'd sit at right now.
All right, got it. So in current space-time, you're kind of okay with the whole scene where it's at. I got it.
Yeah, with a couple caveats. There are a couple. I don't like cancel culture. I don't like how people's lives can be destroyed if they tweet out one wrong thing or whatever. I'm not okay with that kind of stuff. But for like a broad picture, I think I'm okay-ish with where we're at right now.
All right, so that leads into, that's a good segue. Alex Jones was thrown off in the last debate you had with this guy. You seem to be okay with that. What about that scenario of Jones getting thrown off? Are you okay with? What do you think the justification was that it was legitimate?
Well, I mean, like, Jones is literally like denying that like Sandy Hook was a real shooting. So I don't know if any like private company should be compelled to like host his stuff. I could be wrong, but as far as I'm aware right now, I think Alex Jones, don't they have like their own network now or whatever?
I don't know the detail of that? I know a lot of his platforms were thrown off. I don't know if there's any remaining.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of freedom of speech working as intended. Like you don't have an obligation as a private platform to host any type of speech. If somebody's going to come on and say some like extreme shit like that, I mean it's pretty predictable that you probably aren't going to want to host them on your platform. So yeah,
let me start. I got it.
Yeah.
So let me say this then. If there's two questions that branch off just of what you said.
Yeah.
On the one hand, we say, okay, Jones said this conspiratorial, he was preaching these conspiracy theories about Sandy Hook. Parents were emotionally traumatized. It was causing harm. And is that what I'm not misquoting you, right?
I mean, I think that's, there's different questions. I'm trying to be very clear in every question I answer. So right now, I'm not answering why I think he should be removed or shouldn't be removed. I'm answering why I think he was removed. Yeah, I think he was removed over the Sandy Hook shooting stuff, right? That was like the big thing.
That was my understanding.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so now we have this thing. So Jones is thrown off. What is the slippery slope? So, for example, are we going to say everybody who believes 9/11 was an inside job, because that could cause the same type of trauma to families that they're representing, as Sandy Hook? Where do you draw the line as far as what you could comment on when it becomes conspiracy theory, or when doesn't that infringe in your right to conjecture?
So now again, I'm sorry if I clarify a lot. I just want to make sure we're being understood. So there are three different levels we can talk about. We can talk about the legal level, what private companies should do, and what we are personally or morally okay with. Which level are you asking right now?
I got it. We're on the corporate level.
Corporate level. Right now, so on the corporate level, you have a right as a corporation, and you probably should have a right to host or not host whatever types of speech you deem acceptable. So if somebody's going to engage in kind of like fringe conspiracy theory that seems to undermine not only like official narratives of a country, but also kind of like are damaging towards or hateful toward, not hateful, damaging towards like people that were directly involved.
All right. So the Sandy Hook thing, that was
or like 9/11 conspiracy theory, I would say.
So you would be for banning anybody who said anything other than outside the governmental narrative. If they went beyond that, you would be for banning that person from.
So I may or may not personally be for it, but I support a company's right to choose whether or not they wish to host that type of content. Yeah.
Okay, so you will leave it up to the companies to decide. You maybe some Silicon Valley billionaire or somebody who is in a guardian like Plato's Republic, like one of the guardians. I mean, who is going to make these decisions?
Well, realistically, the people making the decisions are probably the advertisers, right? It comes down to what advertisers are comfortable supporting, right?
So we're going back to corporations. Once again, it's a corporate decision. So
pretty
on
much,
the ownership level of the platform, but also any advertisers that are related to that.
Pretty much, yeah.
I dig it. But let me ask you this. Doesn't this present a new problem? Because now this platform that I am on, not only have so they're dealing with conspiracy theories, but now if I say anything that violates what one of their corporate business relationships would view as damaging, now I'm leaving a little more restricted, aren't I? If we're going by that corporate platform.
Well, I mean, so are you saying like, let's say Facebook is sponsored by Pepsi and I start tweeting out, fuck Pepsi.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a company has a right to do that. Personally, I think
we're not even saying fuck Pepsi. Let's say Pepsi's involved in some devious shit overseas. These corporations, whether it's in India or whatever, let's say you start talking about that, but that hurts Pepsi's bottom line. Pepsi hypothetically has a relationship with YouTube. Now I'm still you're cornering me more and more. You know what I'm saying? You're pushing me into a tighter and tighter Overton's window.
Yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if a company started to defend the corporate interests of the advertisers insofar as it's a specific advertiser interest, because that seems like it would take that particular platform down a very bad road that would make it not popular. Like people would be writing articles, people would probably stop using.
Oh man, wait, let me give you an example so we could just we can put this in real world time. MSNBC previously was owned by GE. GE was a defense contractor.
Okay.
This defense contractor was making money off the war, and those reporters who were anti-war were fired. That was Phil Donahue. That was Cenk Uygur. That was Ashley Banfield. Now this corporation, GE, is now promoting a war that profits itself. You want
Well, so this is a way. So we're moving to like journalist to like journalist.
No,
Outlets, whatever.
we're heading to journalism. Let me speed this up.
Sure.
Needless to say, GE owns MSNBC.
Okay.
So now I'm giving you an example of extreme corporate censorship, what gets out to me. And that's a real world example of where corporations interfere with a transmitted message. And now you're saying those companies are linked to internet. Yeah, they are, because now Comcast owns MSNBC. Everything that goes out now, nuts to bolts, is controlled by a corporation. So you have the actual cable wires that are the circuitry of the system, the nervous system, and now you have the dissemination, which is the MSNBC. So there are so many corporate interests at stake, and then you connect that to a social media platform. That's very dangerous. That's corporatism, which always turns into fascism, which is what we're seeing.
Yeah, maybe. So there's a lot of different levels of what we're talking about here. So in terms of like a journalist outlet, I have different opinions about whether or not I think that these journalist outlets should be like for profit. I think that that's led to a lot of perverse incentives in American media these days. So I'm not okay with a lot of these journalist outlets like literally being profit driven. I think that leads to perverse incentives. I just said this. But my critique or my evaluation or my standards are going to be a lot different for those outlets than they would for like social media. So like before we're talking about like what should we be allowed to post on like YouTube or Facebook, that's going to be a way different conversation than how should corporate interests be allowed to control, major media publications. Now I would still say that, I mean, you have a right as a media outlet to choose, do the concerns of my sponsors outweigh individual journalists? I mean, that is still your right. I would hope that if that was happening, it was made public by another outlet.
So if you're counting on the corporation's goodwill, that they'll be fair players, and that we could trust their honesty to make the right decisions as far as our speech is concerned. I mean, what you're saying is ultimately we're handing them the decision.
No, I don't think you should
as far
ever
as speech.
No, I don't think you should ever trust a corporation. A firm's job is to make profit. That's all they care about.
It is amoral.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. You'd never trust a corporation. Of course not. But what I would trust a corporation to do is to do things that would make it money. My hope, and I guess I would have to, I don't know these particular firings as much. MSNBC doesn't come off to me as a pro-war media outlet. I guess maybe they could be, and I've missed a lot. But my hope would be...
let me give you, wait, I got to stop you there, man. When they had the Syria gas attack, MSNBC was pushing more intervention. When Trump was...
Wait, but literally everybody was pro-intervention there, even the Democratic Party.
Yeah. You just said, give me an example of where they're more pro-war. I'm not saying other forces weren't in the same...
But that was in well, hold on. This is a very niche example. So this is in response to, so you're referring to when there was another chemical weapons
attack. The Assad gas attack.
Yes. And Trump was considering bombing. Yeah.
Right. And let's even take it further. Putin was winning, and all of a sudden you have this gas attack. Now, whether that's coincidental, I'm not going to say. What I am saying is this corporation was pushing war because they still have contacts with GE, which is a defense contract. You see the conflict of interest. You want me to give you some more conflict of interest? Why don't we take Fox News? Fox News is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch sits on the board of directors of Genie Energy, along with Dick Cheney and some of the Rothschild family. That is on Wikipedia. Any of your listeners could look it up. Do you think Fox News might not have a vested interest in the Syrian gas lines?
Okay, it's possible. Wait. So we need to hold on. We got to go one point at a time. There's a lot of stuff to deal with here. Okay, so back to your initial point of whether or not you should trust a corporation. I wouldn't trust a corporation. Okay, my hope would be, the idea would be that if some company was starting to fire journalists because they were anti-war, that like other outlets, especially journalist outlets, would be like incentivized to report on that and to make that outlet look bad. So I don't know the situation firsthand because I'm not familiar with it. My guess is going to be that those journalists that were fired were probably fired for something a little more extreme than just being anti-war, because that was the only thing that happened.
Well, each of those journalists states that's not the case. So you have the person who was fired. You're saying that from an outside perspective, but I would say that usually if somebody's fired, they have firsthand data of.
Do you think that a person who's fired is always going to give you an unbiased account of what they were fired for?
Right, but if it's a coincidence where every person who was against the war was fired, then you're talking about some astronomical mathematical odds, aren't you?
I don't think that's that astronomical at all. I would have to look into exactly why it would happen. But like, if a company wants to fire people for being opposed to a war or pro-war or whatever, I mean, that's the prerogative of that journalistic outlet, right? Like, I imagine like Fox News probably only hires people that coincide with a certain opinion that they share as well, right? They tend to be right-leaning. I imagine that the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN probably only hire people that, coincide with a certain opinion.
Wait a minute, Washington Post? Washington Post is owned by Amazon. You don't think that would be they would be a little biased in pushing the viewpoint of the guy who wants to control global commerce? You don't think they have a $600 million contract with the CIA?
Yeah, wait, of course they would.
What we're saying is there's a corporatocracy.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I don't know. Yeah, you're acting like I'm not going to sit here and tell you that all of these publications are unbiased or that corporatism is good here, right? I'm answering very simple questions about what they should or shouldn't be allowed to do, right?
Yeah, but you haven't. All right, sorry. Go ahead.
A privately owned firm should probably be allowed to make the types of decisions about what type of content they should or shouldn't host. I believe that.
Right. Okay.
Now, when it comes to journal outlets, I don't think that profit motives are healthy here. I don't think I like the idea of for-profit journal outlets. So things like the BBC, I think, function better, or even NPR in the United States function better than an entertainment media / journal outlet. I don't think that's good. But these are two very separate issues. Like, if you're going to tell me that
NPR was bought, it pretty much depends on all its contributions from corporate sponsors, mainly the Koch brothers.
I thought NPR was publicly funded.
No, sir, it is not. It is supported. It says NPR. NPR, if you look at its list of donors, it is almost purely subsidized by corporations.
Okay. Well, I mean, if that's the case, then I would be opposed to that as well. But I would have to. I would have to look at it.
Let me say what this is all coming down to. You're saying I agree. You and I are in agree. A private company should dictate what is said in its space.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, every social media platform is owned by a corporation. There is no public platform there is not a monetary conflict of interest. And what really we're saying is that there has to be a separation of this for-profit and non-profit, because right now 5 or 6 corporations own all the media, or 90-something%. You Google that. I challenge anyone who's listening to your show to Google that figure. I think it was the study done in 2012. 6 corporations control all of the media, and that was put out on every major media outlet. So why don't we work towards a better paradigm? Why don't we separate this for-profit speech and have a real free speech public platform paid for by the government, but it is irrevocable, and now we could speak freely? Would you agree to that?
And so far as journal outlets go, yeah, probably.
Okay, so journalism. Now, would you agree? All right, so this is an interesting thing. So somebody who's a journalist, now let's divide that. We have journalists and we have the average citizen. Mm-hmm. Would you give the average citizen the same freedom to speak out on a public platform? That what is governed under the United States Constitution, First Amendment, free speech.
So you have to tell me what context. Do you mean like on an MSNBC site or like on YouTube?
No,
or
I'm
Facebook?
saying me, the citizen, me. You
on what site though? On what site are you posting? Do you mean like an op-ed for CNN? We have to be like really careful about what we're talking about. Because real quick, just because you're getting a lot of your stuff out there. Okay, so we opened this conversation with a discussion of what it sounded like was like, how should we be allowed to or not be allowed to post on social media platforms? Mm-hmm. But then we immediately segued into journalist outlets. Now, I have 2 entirely different standards for how I evaluate these 2 platforms that we've kind of like muddied the 2 things, but these stand very separate to me. So I don't really care much about like how like social media platforms are regulated. These are private companies. I don't think they have like an obligation.
No, sir. So I agree.
I know you do, but you just said a bunch of stuff. Let me just make sure that I am being very clear, because I need to build a positive case on my end. Okay. So sure. I think that private firms should be allowed to do what they want in terms of hosting content. If you want to be Facebook or you want to be Google or YouTube or whatever, you can do what you want. That's fine. I think I'm okay with that. If you ban conservatives or liberals because you don't like them, whatever, dude, it's a private thing. But when we're looking to outlets like Fox News or CNN or something, well, I think the standards should be a little bit different here. If Facebook wants to start banning posts because Pepsi is their sponsor, I don't care, okay? Now, if CNN wants to only write about certain like economic activities or certain foreign policy activities because they have like a Lockheed or a GE sponsor or whatever, well, that's a little bit different. Like we look to journalism outlets to do more than we would to like YouTube. So I think that there should be a different set of standards here. I think that's very important that we draw a distinction between these two platforms. But
all right,
okay,
so we are. I got it.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Just making sure.
Yeah. So right now, I'm gonna just finish off the journalistic one. So
Okay.
I think it sounds like you were in agreement with me that there should be a public, non-financial space for journalism to publish, so we know there's no vested interest interfering with the stories. Would you?
Yeah. So my understanding of the BBC, I could be wrong. My understanding of the BBC is that it's not government ran, but all of the funding for the BBC comes from the government, which I think is maybe not perfect, but I think it's better than it.
You still have a corporate filter. It's like health insurance companies, even if it's like Medicare or some other shit, they farm it out to private corporations to do the distributions, et cetera.
Does that happen with the BBC?
Yeah. So the BBC, there is corporate interference, but I cannot speak in detail of what that is. I don't have enough data, but I've read from many sources that there is a lot of corporate interference with the BBC.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well, I would say the BBC model is probably superior at the very least to what we have with like Murdoch today and like Fox News and CNN and everything. But
well, it gets back to my original thing that 5 corporations control these platforms one way or another, from nuts to bolts, from delivery systems, from the cable to the actual dissemination. So once again, I think we've established that the corporate end of it. You seem to agree that there should be a public space for journalism to broadcast freely. You went back to the BBC, but even we got that was imperfect. So now are we going back again to where we're saying maybe there should be a public platform?
Well, I don't know if I agree with just because something isn't perfect doesn't mean it should be tossed out. Like I think the BBC does a pretty good job. I mean, I'm sure there might be some corporate influence somewhere, but like they don't run ads or anything. They don't have like corporate sponsors. And then I checked this real quick because I'm just to make sure. Like apparently even for NPR, like only 23% of their funding or whatever comes from like or 29% comes from like corporate funding.
I'm going to challenge that figure. I mean, I'm not challenging it, but I'm not accepting it until I verify it.
Okay, gotcha. All right. I'm just looking at their operating revenues from 2014 to 2018.
I've heard sources that it is, from the sources I've gotten, and I can't quote any numbers, but it is pretty much primarily corporate owned from top.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
To ceiling. That's my data. And I can't cite the sources.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, but I mean, like publicly funding things would probably be good, I think. But
okay. All right. Yeah, all right. Okay, all right. So we're kind of on some common ground there. Maybe there's some kind of room for wiggle room in either of our space.
Okay.
So next we go to the private space, the citizen. Do they have the same rights? Do they have a right to a free platform that's uninhibited by corporate interest, or do you think that's only the right of journalists?
Well, I don't know if anyone has a right to that type of platform. I mean, you have like a right to speak on, you have like a right to your freedom of speech from like a legal protection standpoint. I don't know how I feel about like a right to post speech on somebody else's platform that they should be obligated to.
No, sir. I'm giving the same example. Should there be a public platform that is publicly funded for people to speak on under the First Amendment of the Constitution, so there's no corporate interference?
I don't know. That would be interesting to see that set up. So you're saying like you would like fund like basically like a government website where everybody could post kind of?
Yeah, that was equivalent in technology where people could, there would be a public option YouTube. There would be a public option Facebook. Facebook might have its bells and whistles, but at least you would have something equivalent that was free, and the government would have some leeway as far as patents and, reimbursing any of the technology it took, but have something that's at least a core of that, because in the 21st century, the internet is the Gutenberg press. So when you inhibit somebody's speech on the internet, that is a heavy elimination of speech. And I think I would think that the public could have the same right as those journalists.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting idea, I think. Yeah. I don't know like how much funding you would need for it or how you would run it or whatever, but yeah, I mean, I think that would be an interesting idea. Sure.
All right, cool. So it sounds like maybe we get to a space of free speech but we need to change the system a bit. It's not in its current 100% corporate form, going by all the news outlets who reported that story. It is completely corporate controlled. And to my way of thinking, that leads to fascism, because corporatism, it's financialized. And when you start destroying the planet, when you start burning down the Amazon rainforest, when you start destroying the foundations of society, eviscerating the middle class for profit, you're going to have a more unstable world. And that requires more strictures. It requires more repression of speech. You're also authorizing a more authoritarian society whenever you push for restrictions on speech, because if you look at the Nazis, if you look at Stalin, making points about the government, that was a capital crime. So you have to be careful. You're pushing. Anytime you take the position where you give up rights, it is really hard to get those rights back once they are gone. And that's why I think when you start to even come down on the side of restriction of speech, a lot of people sacrificed a lot to give you that right. You look at Allen Ginsberg with Howell in the 1950s in his court cases. It could be right down to, the Revolutionary War, fighting for that, to win a republic to have a constitution. So when you're not, I think it behooves us to err on the side of free speech. That's what I'm saying. I think, you play a rhetoric game on speech, or you get into that scene. That's cool. It's fun to think about philosophically, but real world, that's a heavy right to lose. And you're giving away a lot. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, sure. I don't think I necessarily disagree with anything you're saying.
All right, cool. All right. So we're in agreement. So you made a statement that last week that you thought you're not so sure about democracy anymore. You're losing your faith in it. Where I think, I'm paraphrasing. Was that the gist of it?
Possibly, yeah.
Do you still feel that way now?
Yeah, I'd say so.
And what's your reasons for that?
It feels like the problems that we're facing in today's world are very complicated, a little bit too complicated to just be parsed by like common sense people. That maybe the problems are too complicated and they require like a more sophisticated mechanism for addressing them, or a more sophisticated structure, or maybe I shouldn't say sophisticated, more efficient structure. So for instance, like the way that like an authoritarian China can address a problem is going to be more efficient than the way like a democratically elected body could.
Right on. I think China is the future model. It's totalitarian capitalism.
Sure. Yeah.
But maybe the difference being China seems to have some inkling of concern for the future as far as developing more renewable energy and shit like that. I think in the United States, you have more of it's so profit driven. It's all short term cash in kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you have a little faith. So how would you handle it? If democracy is no longer working, you saying we take the China model?
I mean, the China model seems effective. I don't think that can happen without destroying the United States, right? Like our entire constitution would have to be shredded. The people wouldn't be for it. Like you would need like a violent revolution to like come down and like destroy everything. Basically, it would be catastrophic.
You're talking about in a post-crash world, that's where you would see that kind of happening. China maintaining itself, not crashing in a global economic collapse, and then if they were still intact, kind of coming in and running things. Or
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want that to happen personally because I'm not Chinese, but I mean, it seems like their system seems to be more effective than ours. Maybe it's possible that our system could have worked better, or could work better with, maybe better education or something. I'm not sure, but I don't know. The incentives just seem so whack, and the problems today seem so complicated that it seems hard to imagine that like people could figure out the problems that we have today, just given the ability to vote. I don't know.
So you're pessimistic. You're seeing like a Roman Empire collapse or something like that. Is that the trajectory you see it?
Kind of. I mean, that's what it feels like. I mean, I could be wrong, but
I mean, historically, look at the ancient democracies. The founding fathers, they modeled this country. You're a U.S. citizen.
Yeah,
I'm assuming. Okay. Mm-hmm. They modeled the country. They took a lot from ancient Athens. They took a lot from the Roman Republic. They took like John Locke, some philosophy. That's where you get into all that private property, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
But if you look at the country, if you look at the societies they modeled themselves after, ancient Athens, that was a serious crash. It depends on what point of the arc of time you're in when you're assessing a democracy. Because if you were in the time of Pericles in ancient Athens, you would say this democracy shit is fantastic. But if you were in when Socrates was drinking the hemlock, then you might say, wow, man, Plato's Republic, yeah, we need to clamp down. This is a total failed experiment. Do you think maybe that's where the point in time where you're experiencing it?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. My historical knowledge isn't really great enough to say that, though. Like, I'm sure there are probably throughout all of American history, people have been saying the republic is ready to collapse. Like, we're almost at the end now. Like, feels like people have probably saying that for a long time. Things maybe have been worse than they were today. It's hard for me to say. Right, I'm only 30. Maybe things were worse. Maybe we've always been saying we're teetering on the edge of oblivion. Like, I'm not sure, but that's just what it feels like to me now. Yeah.
Got it. Let me ask you a question. Your name, Destiny, is that like a philosophical thing of free will versus predetermination?
Yeah, we can say that if it sounds cool. The reality is I was just 9 and I thought it sounded cool and it stuck with it. But but I'm like a hard determinist, so I wouldn't have a very romantic notion of anything related to free will anyway. So it'd be pretty down. It'd be a downer.
Okay, so we're acting out kind of pre-programmed.
Yeah, more or less, we were set in motion, and we're just kind of following those paths without anything that we can truly do.
Maybe potentially starting with the Big Bang.
Yeah,
on a subatomic level. Interesting. So, all right, that's that's interesting. All right, getting back to free speech. Sorry, I just wanted to. I was just curious where you took that. All right, so democracy, bad trajectory. You're pessimistic. You see this thing on a downward slope. Is there anything we could do to slow it down? Are there any brakes that we could apply that would help the situation? Do you have any kind of positive things that could be put into place to kind of slow down the entropy?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, like big public awareness campaigns. I don't know. I don't see anything changing a lot. I mean, I think the global warming thing, when oceans actually start to rise and like a lot of people start moving inward, I think we'll take like a real good look at it. I don't know. It might be too late by then, but I'm pretty sure that way, like when actual problems start to occur, we're going to start to like take a look at it like a lot harder.
Wow. No, yeah. Sorry. So maybe, are you seeing this from a bigger perspective where you're seeing environmental collapse and almost all the stuff we're talking about is going to be moot from the extreme crash of the environment?
I think that more or less that's going to be the time when we start to take it seriously, is when actual economic damage starts to occur. That's like seeable, like immediately and measurable. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think people it might have to get really bad. And like you said, it might be past the tipping point.
Yeah.
Because from what I understand, they're burning down the Amazon, which is the lungs of the planet, from what I've heard. That's going to make some major environmental catastrophe.
Yeah, probably, but nobody seems to really care about it until stuff gets like really bad. I don't know. I don't know how you can make people care. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're saying exist in this world right now. You're just existing, and we're processing it, and we're seeing what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
And let me ask you a question. I see you playing a video game when you're doing your broadcast.
Sometimes, yeah.
I don't know a lot about the gaming world. I'm kind of ignorant on that. To me, it's like the equestrian world. I'm not familiar with the folk ways and the traditions and what the politics are. Could you just give me some insight? I mean, so when you're playing this game on the show, you're talking to your audience is primarily other gamers, other people who are not into gaming, and
it super depends on like the type of person you are and what type of content you have. So like some people play games and their audience is just full of like people that play games. They're all gamers. Like that's what they do. I'd say for my audience, because I do so much political stuff, we're probably more politically driven. So oftentimes when I'm playing games, I'm like having political conversations with people. But yeah, like every streamer is going to be different when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Where do you fall? I know the guy PewDiePie was in the news a lot. That's how I know about it. mainly, do you think he should have been thrown off, or do you think that they were right to keep him on? Did he go past like what you would think was okay, or you think that the corporate?
I don't think PewDiePie did anything like overtly wrong. I just think he's really irresponsible, kind of with like the people that he supports sometimes, and he's made a couple of gaffes that he doesn't. I don't know. He kind of takes responsibility for them. He kind of doesn't. But yeah.
Got it. So okay. So PewDiePie.
Yeah, I don't think he's done. I don't think PewDiePie is like this horrible, irredeemable, like fascist Nazi or whatever. But I think he's done a couple of dumb things for sure.
Do you think he might have been doing comedy that didn't go off well?
Well, I'm thinking more about like when he was like promoting channels that were probably like Nazi-ish people. I don't think he realized it when he was doing it, and then he kind of like doubled down on it afterwards. And then he seems a little like kind of plays like an unwitting fool to some people online.
Okay, and given that you're into gaming, do you ever have this thought? Do you ever, this is possible no matter what your belief system. A simulated computer reality. So you're in, let's take a Kardashev type 2 civilization. Do you think this could be a video game analogous to what you're playing, but on a much more advanced level, and we're two sentient programs communicating? Do you think that's a possibility, or where do you fall on that?
Are you asking me right now if I think we live in a simulation?
Do you ever hold that as a possibility, being somebody in the gaming world and seeing if it advanced technologically to a higher level civilization, do you ever think that's a potentiality,
sure,
a matrix scenario or something?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally possible, but I mean, I don't usually consider stuff like this much because it seems like impossible for me to know. When you get into like a lot of like meta ethics or metaphysics, would this be metaphysics? Like I don't like a lot of this. I would just say for humans is like unknowable. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. We can't like validate our own existence or verify our own existence or anything like that. So there might be like gods, or we might be part of a simulation or some alien experiment, or I could just be a brain like floating in liquid somewhere, having all of this like simulated for me. There'd be no way for me to know. So I don't really think about it much.
It's an unknowable. Understood. Yeah, I was just posing it as a philosophical question.
Yeah, it's possible. I can't speak to it at all, because even if it was true, I wouldn't tell you like what are the chances or how could I. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to know anything about it.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and you made a point about the brain. So, do you think just the fact that we are here, like Descartes, I think therefore I am. So, even whatever we are, whether we're programs, we're sentient. So, does our sentience prove that theory as far as Descartes?
I mean, I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I guess like I would say like our experience maybe says something that like we are things that probably exist that are having an experience. But I mean, I don't think I would make any statements beyond that. I don't know. I don't usually think about like those very foundational things too much, because a lot of it seems to devolve into like huge like unknowables. Like I don't think humans can know anything about a lot of this stuff. So I don't think about much.
Every question brings like new questions. The more you discover, it's a very intricate universe.
Sure. Or at some level, you get like so foundational that your answers all become circular. Like, I think, therefore I am. Well, how do you know I think? Well, I know I think because I'm thinking. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't really say anything profound. So like,
yeah, that is right. So what is thinking? I don't, but all right, that's an interesting question. That's you've taken it to another level. What is thinking? So you're saying that could disprove Descartes' statement?
Well, I'm not gonna go as far as like I can disprove Descartes or anything. But I'm just saying that like let's say like I want to know I exist. Well, what's the first example that I exist? Well, it's the fact that I think. It's like, okay, well, how do I even know that I'm thinking when it could be some other thing doing the thinking for me? Like, I could never evaluate if something else was doing all the thinking for me and implanting the thoughts into my head. How would I know that? I wouldn't be.
Then isn't that other thing an I am? So something exists behind the.
Yeah, it could be, or it could exist in some boundary where like logic, like the way that we understand like deductive reasoning or inductive or like any form of like causality, like maybe it doesn't even exist on that plane. Like this could all be like a holographic projection from like a totally different plane of existence where we can't even account for everything over there. So like we could be like this whole existence could be like the emergent property of some underlying system. I don't know. I can't know any of that. Like I can't even fathom like an illogical universe that can extrapolate over to this one. Like, so I don't think about those types of things too much, right?
So you're operating in the very real world, would you call, is that like, would that be considered like a materialist? Do you
Yeah, I'm a
kind of going into
hardline
very,
materialist. Yep.
like, and I don't mean materialism into like consumer, you believe
No,
in
no, yeah,
very,
I'm a materialist. Yeah, a
yeah.
physicalist slash materialist. Yeah, I don't do any kind of
Okay.
dualism or any of that silly stuff.
Okay. Got it. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I would accept your those other
Mm-hmm.
spheres silly, but I totally respect your free speech right to say that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I don't mean it's silly in terms of I consider like, I don't think there are very many interesting or profound insights you can get from investigating those thoughts too much. Like, let's say that I were to just determine all of a sudden, like, oh man, I actually am like, I am like a projection from some other mind or whatever. Like, is that going to change the way that I live my life? I don't know if it would make a difference in terms of how I evaluate anything. Or this was a simulation. Like, am I going to go jump out my building right now? Like, I don't think so. So I prefer to think of things like a little bit further down the road. So like, I'm more interested. So from ethics, right? I'm more interested like in normative ethics than I am in meta ethics.
Could you define normative ethics, please?
Yeah. Oh, if we look at like three layers of ethics, you've got meta ethics, normative ethics, applied ethics. Meta ethics is like, what is good? And then normative ethics is like, what system should we use to apply good? And then like applied ethics is like, in these particular situations, what do we consider good? So like meta ethics, I think is like a waste of time. I don't like any, like, what is the nature of good? So basically what I just say is like, oh, well, we should probably like not kill people and probably like maximize like people's happiness. Like that's
You're not an ontological dude.
No, fuck all that. Well,
Yeah,
fuck. I don't know anything about ontology. I don't study ontology. I don't read about ontology.
Understood. Okay.
But I'm also not dismissing ontology. I just don't like things that are too foundational in terms of like what is the nature of existence, or like the nature, like these very fundamental things. Because I don't know. I would rather just like make a couple assumptions and then just do work past that. I think it's more interesting for me.
Okay, so get back to normative. So we've eliminated that. So hit me on this normative ethics.
Yeah, so normative ethics would be questions of like deontology versus utilitarianism, right? Like, should we maximize the utility of everybody? Are actions good or bad in and of themselves, or do we look at the outcomes?
Sorry, just not to stop, but utilitarianism, like John Stuart Mill, is that kind of
sure? Yeah. Or there's a lot of different like things under like consequentialist ethics, but yeah, I think that those questions are more interesting and lead us down better roads. Because the difference, like, are there things that are good just in and of themselves that we should do, even if they make bad outcomes? Or are there things that we should do that might lead to good outcomes that individually people aren't okay with? Because that's like where you get a lot of like really interesting questions. So for instance, like, should we force everybody to be an organ donor, right? Like that's an interesting question that has like real world application, I think. And I'm more interested in stuff like that rather than like, where does goodness come from?
You believe in the greater good. So if it benefits the majority of society, if a minority suffer, the greater good is the choice or the road that you go down.
Well, for me personally, yeah, I would say that I do. Yeah, I'm a big like a holistic kind of like what benefits all of society more kind of person. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a push towards that. Okay, so normative. Sorry, I kind of got off. So normative seems to be like so you're saying it's a utilitarian society.
Well, normative could be like utilitarian or like deontological. Like normative ethics is just basically like, what kind of system do we use to apply our ethics?
And I'm sorry, what's the other term you used along with utilitarianism?
You have like, so like broadly, you can be like a consequentialist. So you look at the outcomes of an action, or you could be like a deontologist. You look at the action in and of itself, right?
Okay, like so the action is judged by the action, not its intent.
Not the outcome of the action.
Or the outcome. Yeah. So it's related to the intent of the action?
Well, just the action in and of itself. So like the two basic challenges to this is like a deontologist might say it's always unethical to lie, no matter what. Even if you're lying to save somebody's life, you should never lie because
that's like a Kant. It's like Kant, right? Like the greater universal good.
Yeah, like categorical imperatives and everything would be like under deontological thought.
Okay. Got it. Now I get it. Okay, cool. All right, so you're doing for the greater good. So all right, that makes sense. I think that's logical. Mm-hmm. And just anytime you have to split, give me the signal. I don't want to.
Oh, no, you're good. Don't worry.
You might be a nice guy, and you like have you have to move on to the next thing. If you're being polite, just say, "Hey, man, I got to go." We'll zap it. Okay, so getting back to what you were saying. Okay, so I'm seeing this normative. So it's the greater good, and you're moving. But and maybe we could even both agree that you want to reduce that margin of people who suffer. So if it's 90%, you want to move it to 95, 98, ultimately, as much as possible.
Generally, for me, that's what my goals are when I talk about like applied ethics. So policies, do we talk about like minimum wage or healthcare or immigration? Like I'm usually like what leads to the greatest like reduction in harm is usually what I'm looking at.
Okay, the least reduction action. Got it. And okay, so that's normative ethics. And then there was one other component.
Well, applied ethics would be like individual positions, right?
What do you mean by that?
Like policies, like minimum wage would be like an applied ethics position, I think.
Okay, so policies. Got it.
Yeah, or like
Okay.
healthcare or stuff like that. Yeah.
All right. The age you can vote, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. And so how do you incorporate that into your those things? You're not you kind of sidelined the ontological ethics. How does that system work integrating the applied with the normative?
Well, so like me, basically, like I try to look at like what benefits like the most amount of people. Like is basically what I look at, and then we go for our policy positions and we try to figure out like, yeah, that basically.
Okay, and who makes those now you're getting into, now it gets, I guess, more into governmental. Who makes those in that normative society? How do you get ethical people at the top to act in the greater good?
Well, I mean, that's what our elected officials are hopefully for, right?
Yeah. So, all right. So, do you think? But we're not at that state now. I mean, we have elected.
Well, that's essentially what happens. Yeah. I mean, we can argue whether or not our elected officials are ethical or moral, or whether we approve of them personally, but that's more or less what our job with the function of government is now. And I think it performs that function pretty well, that elected officials get to the top and make policies that generally people support. I think that people are pretty dumb, but
the people are dumb. I mean, I need more definition. When you say the people, you mean
when I say people
American
are dumb,
citizenry? What
I mean are American citizens. The decisions that we need to make today are very complicated and very intricate, and it's very hard for an average person to really understand what needs to be done to fix certain problems, or to even recognize that certain problems exist. Is what I mean when I say that.
And okay, so you're saying elected officials should make those decisions in a normative, integrated normative. Normative and applied society. It's the same system we use now. It would be somebody who was elected through vote. Is that how you would do it?
Oh, how I would do it ideally? I don't know how I would do it ideally. I mean, that's how it works right now. I mean, in an ideal manner, it would probably just be one person that knows everything that would be making these decisions, right?
Would it like an AI, like a super intelligence?
Sure, or just like a benevolent dictator or something like that.
All right, now we're getting into it. So that you think we need a strong man to, when things are out of control, somebody to come in and restore order? Is that where, I mean, that's because that's deviating from John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, I think, to going towards more of a dictatorship.
We're so carefully when we talk about like utilitarianism or deontology, that's not really talking about like a form of government, right? Like a totalitarian dictator could be a utilitarian or a deontologist.
Okay, so a benevolent, I got it.
Yeah, like a dictator is more efficient than like a government that's democratically elected.
Let's look at so like Hitler in the early 30s, like when he put in 33, he took out a lot of loans from the, he got a lot of money. He had a brilliant guy working with him, the head of the Reichsbank. His name, I forget it for the moment, but anyway, everybody started going back to work. And until he crashed the society by starting World War II. Would you say that's an example of somebody who's maybe benevolent to a majority, but like you said, there's always a minority to suffer?
Hold on. So we have to be, I'm trying to be really careful in terms of.
We got to be careful. Yeah, I got it.
Well, no, I don't care about Hitler. We can talk about Hitler. I don't care about that. Well, I'm just trying to be careful that I'm getting, there's a difference between like efficient claims versus like moral claims. So for instance, like a very efficient way to deal with homelessness in the United States would probably be to kill every homeless person, but that doesn't mean it's a preferable policy, right? So like an authoritarian dictatorship makes very efficient decisions because it doesn't have to waste time with a democratically elected body. That doesn't mean that it's going to make the most moral decisions, right? Or the most preferable decisions for society. I'm just saying that authoritarian bodies seem to move more rapidly and don't have as many problems sometimes, or don't have the same types of problems as outside systems. So here's an example. Trump right now is trying to fight a tariff war against China. Whether or not you think the tariff war is good or bad, one thing that China knows is that if China waits and another administration comes in, then the opinions can change on the policy that the US has against China. China's government never changes, right? China doesn't have to worry about like them losing an election and then a new person coming in, but American politicians do have to worry about that. That's something they have to fight with. They have to maintain popularity in order to continue their policies, right? So that's just one example, but there are other problems too. An authoritarian regime, like like China could go genocide groups of people like the Uyghurs, and the people really have no say over it whatsoever, right? And America, we would hope that if America was doing stuff like that, like for instance, what's going on like with children at the border, you see massive public outcry and pressure that forces like Trump to change his acts there, right? Which has happened. So like there are pros and cons to every system. I'm just saying authoritarian regimes move quicker than democratically elected ones. That can be good or it could be bad.
Right, but what about the old adage, absolute power corrupts absolutely? Isn't it inherent in an authoritarian system that it wants more and more power, and at some point that adage goes into effect, and even the most well-intentioned authoritarian dictatorships eventually fall prey to that power trip?
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, it's totally possible that could happen.
Yeah. So it's so once again, it's hard to find this system that works. I mean, they all seem to have pitfalls.
Sure. Yeah, they could. Yeah. I don't know what the perfect system would be. Like it's a hard one, but yeah.
Interesting. What about a Star Trek resource-based society or something do you see some kind of future, at least maybe, okay, so it looks bleak now. Is there an example of a futuristic society that you think works? Maybe it would be at Star Trek or whatever. Is there any future? Do you have a futuristic vision that could work?
Honestly, like our democratic system right now with a more educated population seems like it could work. It's just really hard to push for that education, I guess. I don't know enough about Star Trek to really know how their society works. Like, don't they have like infinite resources and stuff?
Exactly. It's a resource base. So everybody's comfortable. You're not worried about getting
Oh yeah. So like if you're living in like a post-scarcity society, you've already solved like most of the difficult problems of having a society. So, I mean, yeah.
And I guess the question would be, how do you get to that post-scarcity society? Could an authoritarian government take you there? Could a democratic government take you there? I mean, it seems to me you'd want to transition to get out of people. So many people are on hamster wheels in the United States. They're working 2-3 jobs. They're trying to make their health, they can't make their health insurance payments. And even if they have health insurance, they still might get bankrupted because of the loopholes.
I have no idea. If I knew that, I would be a trillionaire. I would solve all of our problems. I don't know if it's hydrogen power or nuclear plants.
No. I agree with you. So I'm saying if we could get past at least that economic suffering, we would have a more stable society.
Yeah, probably. I would hope so. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. That's interesting. So it still seems like we need. I think there needs to be more work on how we transition to that society. I think that's the problem. There are so many vested power interests that want to stay on the status quo. It's really hard to veer the ship in a different direction, because we have to admit it's financialized. We have a financialized system, be it China, you could call it capitalist communism, or be it the United States. How do you break free of that paradigm? It's so entrenched from everything where our exchange right now to everything. Could we change the consciousness of those corporations? Could they ever become forces for good? Because right now neoliberalism and that kind of corporatism is deforesting the planet. The Fukushima Energy Corporation, or not, that's not their name, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like markets are really powerful. I really like capitalism. I think it does really good things. You have to make sure that it's pointed in a healthy direction. So you need like a very strong government to point those corporations in the right direction. So when we talk about things like climate change, right? Like I think the market could give you a solution to climate change. You just need to make it really fucking expensive to pollute. So things like carbon taxes or cap and trade, like if companies pollute, like charge them like a motherfucker for it. And it'll incentivize people to find different ways to tackle problems. That seems to be the way we'd have to address it in the West, because we're a largely market-based society. Now in China, they don't have to worry about that because the government basically just dictates shit. But yeah.
Well, the problem with the cap and trade deal, and I agree with you in principle, but let me criticize cap and trade. It was put into effect, or the idea, the genesis did come from Goldman Sachs. They wanted to see a licensing issue market for emissions. They wanted a right to pollute commodities market. And ultimately, I think that would have not solved a lot of problems. A better thing would have been if corporations say legitimately want to stop, there's an incentive to stop destroying the planet and move over to solar or actual alternate renewable energies. this whole game of you have to pay me to pollute is going to be crooked. It's a crooked deal. We saw it in the housing bubble in 2000.
Well, like everything, it has to be market based, though, right? Other than just, or you could just make it illegal to pollute, right? But otherwise, there has to be some.
Yeah. So okay. So then you would need a very strong state to enforce that.
Sure.
And right now, is it fair to say that the corporation is stronger than the state in the United States?
I mean, that's hard because the two of them are linked so much. I mean, corporation and state kind of like play into each other a lot. But I mean, like I would say like the state does have some power. I mean, like there are things that are legal and there are things that are illegal. But I mean, it definitely seems like it favors like corporatism at the moment over like the state, right? Like corporations are involved in writing so much legislation and everything. Yeah.
Well, let me point a real world example. The FDA, the guy who's heading it now, this is the person supposed to be in charge of regulating food industries and all that other stuff, crops, agriculture, vitamins. The guy who's sitting on top, who's the head of that, was on the board of directors of all the corporations he was supposed to be regulating. And he was a former venture capitalist, so he had financial ties as well.
Sure.
You go back prior to that, there was a Monsanto lawyer sitting on the board. Monsanto was a heavy player in poisoning the soil. We could say speeding up the ecocide. And so how do you even have regulatory agencies when the people who are sitting at the heads of them are the corporations, really, de facto?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a problem, right? That you'd have to figure out how to solve that. I don't know like what the exact solution is there. But yeah, I mean, like these are problems that you definitely have to figure out. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, okay. So I think that just kind of says America doesn't have that strong state regulation as far as enforcing those kind of regulations. All right. Cool. Well, so where do we go? I mean, so once again, we're in the space of like, do we have any solutions? You know, it all comes back. So we recognize these inherent problems. And are you confident that our current electoral system could handle that? Do you have faith in that?
The system could. I don't think the people that exist here now do. I feel like maybe if we cleaned up like there's a lot of dumb shit that happens right now in the country that shouldn't happen. And maybe if we cleaned up some of that, it would give people more time to be incentivized to care about electoral issues. So like, I believe that like people don't care about climate change if they can't afford like healthcare. People don't care about climate change if they can't like earn enough to like support their family. So like maybe if we get some of these like basic economic problems figured out, it can kind of like give people a foundation of which to build like more care about the society that they live in.
Totally agree with you. Totally fucking agree with you. What about UBI? Do you think that could be a way to create what you're talking about there?
And AI?
UBI.
Oh, UBI. It's possible. In theory, I think I'm okay with UBI as long as it doesn't disincentivize too much or the incentives aren't bad. I've heard some people criticize UBI because they say it eliminates too much like welfare or something. I don't know if that's true or not. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm necessarily opposed to UBI. It seems like an okay thing, but anything that basically makes it so that people's like basic needs are taken care of so they can be more incentivized into caring about like other problems, it's probably a good thing.
All right. So, yeah, I mean, I think UBI is one way to do it, as long as it's sovereign UBI and your UBI check won't be confiscated by your creditors right away. Sure. And then you go into corporate welfare. But, okay, so UBI could be a way to do it. So when people, this is a good concept you brought up, because you're saying when people have time to think, they're not stressing about basic survival. Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
We're moving to self-actualization. We're moving the society upward. I think you and I are in a complete agreement that needs to be handled. And then like you said, this climate catastrophe now, when health insurance isn't an issue, when I'm not going to be thrown out of my apartment, I could contemplate the demise of the planet, that more greater existential threat.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Yeah, right on, man. I agree with you. Wow. I don't really. I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of stuff. Do you have anything you want to add, or do you have anything? Or
No, I don't think.
do you have any other topics you'd like to discuss? Are you into movies? I'm pretty like usually science. What is your trip? You seem to be interested a little bit in philosophy. What are the things that interest you?
I don't know, man. There's a lot of stuff that interests me. Who do you think is going to win the election, or who are you polling for? Who do you want to win, and who do you think is going to win the upcoming elections?
All right. Wow. If I was guessing, I would say Trump's going to win.
Mm-hmm.
What's happened with Biden because of this Ukraine investigation, Ukraine gate, as I call it,
Mm-hmm.
Biden has been damaged. Because whatever you say Trump did, he looks bad with what went down with his son getting that job with the Ukraine Energy Corporation.
Sure.
So now we've knocked out Biden. It looks like Elizabeth Warren could be the front runner to emerge from the damage. They put out some health reports about Bernie. Tulsi Gabbard is no way she's getting in.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm leaning towards maybe Trump. And right now, real time, unless there's some kind of energy shift, maybe Elizabeth Warren.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the scenario I see. As far as who I would vote for, I am more in the Bernie Tulsi camp. That's my ideological sphere.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I don't know much about Tulsi, I guess, but I'm kind of like pulling for Warren at the minute. And it seems like she probably has the best shot at getting in through the Democratic side. And then the election, I think, is a toss-up based on how the economy goes. The economy is doing really well. I think that Trump has a pretty good shot at winning re-election.
Do you think this economy is doing well?
I would have to look at like unemployment and stuff. It doesn't really matter if the economy is doing well. What I should be more so the perception of if the economy is doing well. But I think so far it's been going okay. I think it's doing pretty well. I think it's starting to stagnate a little bit, but we've been teetering on the edge of a recession for like 2 years now or something. Mm-hmm. So like if the recession actually starts to tip in and people start losing their jobs, people are going to be like super, super, super mad. But yeah, I think that the economy is going pretty well right now, all considering.
So let's say the economy remains status quo, not better, not worse. Do you think, you would give it to Trump or Warren in an election?
If the economy is going well, I think Trump.
No, I'm not even saying well. Let's just say where it is.
Where it is right now, I think that Trump has a good chance of winning. It could still go either way, but like, I think that Trump could definitely have a good chance of winning. I think it's a toss up right now. Yeah,
I would put if I was betting, I would say Trump too.
Sure.
Okay. So, and I told you I would vote for either Tulsi or Bernie.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. And you said you're for Warren. So you would take Warren over Bernie?
Bernie is way more to the left of me. Even Warren is more to the left of me, but the whole political system in the U.S. has moved so far right. I'm okay with somebody to the left of me getting in. I would be okay with Bernie, I think, but I'd also be okay with Warren. I think Warren is like a little bit less extreme, which makes me a little bit more favorable to Warren over Bernie, but yeah.
Okay. And how do you mean he's extreme? Just what do you mean exactly?
So like, I'm not a fan of like, for instance, like protectionism. It's not something I like much. But Bernie is like very much a protectionist in terms of like trade policy. He'd probably be big on like tariffs and stuff. I don't like protecting industries.
So you're more TPP, NAFTA? You're into that?
Yes.
That?
Yeah. Multilateral trade agreements. Yeah. It's something I'm generally in favor of.
Well, let's take NAFTA though. The problem is with NAFTA, after that went down with Chimerica and outsourcing all the jobs, the manufacturing base, and then selling China debt and a financialization market, the middle class took a big hit.
I don't agree with that. I think that for the most part, I think Americans generally benefited from NAFTA. I think that there are a couple of people that lost, especially like in manufacturing, but there were other manufacturing jobs that were created as a result of like the NAFTA stuff. And I think most Americans benefited from like cheaper cars and other consumer goods that seemed to help.
What about the auto workers who lost their job to Mexican auto factories? They had good health insurance. They had very good pay packages. There was a standard of living. And there was an industrial base. When you lost that industrial base, you're talking pensions, you're talking health insurance, you're talking livable salary, where a lot of times a man could stay home, work, the wife would stay home. I'm talking more with the middle class miracle of 1945 to 1965. You had a one income household. The kids could go to college. It's like somebody making 200 grand today.
Yeah. More. I mean, like, I understand that. And we see, like, the thing is that like, we can see that, we can see all the people that benefited from those manufacturing jobs, but what you couldn't see were the people in America that were hurt by those manufacturing jobs. So like demand for automobiles was huge in the NAFTA era, and there were a lot of people that just couldn't afford it. So for every great manufacturing job you might have had for somebody that was working and making a lot of money and had great pensions, what you don't see are the 10 to 100 families that just couldn't afford a car to get to work, or couldn't afford a car to give them more, economic mobility in society, or more
So
freedom.
you're saying they reduced the price of the car.
Yes.
And then people became more affordable to the average person.
Yeah.
And you're saying that made the trade-off of losing our manufacturing base
well, I mean, like we haven't
worthwhile.
lost manufacturing in the United States. We've lost the manufacturing jobs, but we still manufacture about as much as we always have. In absolute numbers, it's gone up. As a percentage of GDP, I think it might have fallen a bit. But I mean, like most of those jobs just got automated. So like even if we didn't sell it to Mexico, those jobs were going away anyway.
Well, let's take the Boeing aircraft. The Boeing aircraft, even though it's assembled in the United States, you look at the latest one, they had those problems. Most of the parts are outsourced, and they are brought together to be assembled. So you have a lot of work that's taking place outside of the United States. And even if you go to Walmart and look what's made in China, there is no comparison to what's produced by China. And even if you look at anything, I take a Ford engine or anything, most of the parts have been made elsewhere, maybe in Mexican factories and so forth. So I think the real world evidence shows that we're actually using more stuff. I'll go to Walmart. That's, see what's made in China.
That we're using what? Say that again?
That we're using most stuff that's not being produced in the United States. That is not.
But that's okay though. I mean, like we are like economies change over time. Like if we become like majority like a service economy or whatever, like that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like if other countries can make some things cheaper than us, then let them make it cheaper, and then we just focus on what we're good at, right? Well, like we all have our comparative advantages. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Well, along those lines, it's cheaper to go into automation. And then what happens when I could automate a cashier, but then I could go up, I could automate a white collar office worker because the software that could do something better than him. I could even automate a doctor who looks at x-rays because a computer can see pathologies at a much more defined level. And eventually maybe I could even replace surgeons. What happens when you start moving up this chain of displacement, like we saw with the manufacturing base? What are you going to do with all these people who are going out of work if automation?
I mean, like, so these are problems. Like we have to figure out how to solve these problems, but the solution is always find more jobs for people or modernize your economy. The solution is never take a snapshot of the economy and freeze it and don't innovate, don't get new jobs, don't do anything new, but we don't want to lose the current jobs we have. So keep everybody like in the dark ages. Like using this argument, we could have said, why should we have looms that like automatically weave stuff for us or automatically like sew when all these people are going to go out of business because now they don't have that job? Or why should we have a printing press? What's going to happen to all of our scribes that can no longer write books? Or why should we have automobiles? Now people that have horse-drawn carriages or whatever are going to go, like, we would never use this argument to like keep our economy from modernizing. Like the process of modernizing your economy and becoming more efficient and allocating resources in a more efficient manner, so letting other countries manufacture things for us and us focus on service or whatever, like this is just the history of like how economies work and modernize. Like you want to continue to modernize an economy. Yeah, there are going to be losses, but there are gains as well. Like things are available to us in ways that they never have been. Phones are extremely powerful and affordable for most Americans now. Everybody or a lot of people have access to like the internet, computers. Like, yeah, I mean, like there are definitely downsides to certain policies we enact. There are some people that are going to lose jobs. There are some people that are going to be hurt by certain things, but you find ways to help these people, hopefully, and then you continue to modernize and move on. You never just like take a freeze frame of the economy and then halt your modernization because you're worried that some people might get left behind.
I am 100% in agreement with you as far as I believe in free markets, real free markets that play on an even playing field that are not rigged. I believe in innovation through people. Some people express themselves through starting companies. I get it. The point is you have to create a barrier. I'm not a Luddite, but you have to create a barrier between the interests of those companies and the general well-being. And I think that's why you need a hybrid system. You need a system that is insulated, that protects people's lives, you don't want a society where everybody is sick, they can't afford health care.
Yeah, of course.
Destroy the educational system like with Betsy DeVos. I mean, what she has done to the educational system is a crime against humanity. You're destroying the future generations' minds. And to do that is really bad. You have to have really strong protections to do that. And so I'm for a hybrid system, but you better have some heavy regulation and some ability to protect the public.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. Sorry. All right, but getting more real world. So, all right, so you see Trump. So what if Trump wins another 4 years? Do you see the country erupting in flames, or
I don't think it'll erupt in flames. I just think it would be pretty sad. But I mean, if it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
I think Trump has done a lot to undermine us on the world stage. I don't think his domestic policy is any good. I don't think his trade policy is any good. Like, I don't know. I don't think Trump moves us in a better direction at all.
Yeah. So, you think he's steering the ship, or you think it's a rudderless ship?
I mean, I don't think that Trump in and of itself, I don't think he and of himself can do like a lot of damage individually to the United States. But like in places that he can damage us, he does, I think.
And you stated that's the China trade issues. That's where you think.
Yeah, so like the China trade stuff is really bad. Pulling us out of that joint plan of action thing, the Iran deal, the Iranian nuclear deal, I thought was really bad. I think that like politically, ideologically, philosophically, he reeks of fascism to me, which I don't think is good. We don't want Americans to get on board with that shit, although I guess a lot of them already were. From a Supreme Court point of view, obviously, I'm in favor of more left-leaning justices versus right-leaning ones. Yeah.
What about they have some really heavy abortion laws that were passed in Georgia.
Yeah, because they're trying to get it tested in the new Supreme Court. Yeah.
So right now those are in effect, I believe. I don't know if that's correct data. It's actually on the books where these women could get like 30 years in jail for abortion?
Yeah, some crazy shit. I don't know if they've made it through their state legislatures yet or if they're still proposed, but yeah.
Do you think that maybe that's another flavor of fascism, a Christian fundamental fascism? Could you see that in some parts of the United States creeping and taking over?
Maybe, but I mean, that's always kind of been there in the United States. Yeah.
Okay. And what do you have any questions for me? Do you have any question for me?
You said you're a Democratic Socialist Libertarian. What all does that entail?
Democratic Socialist Libertarian. Democratic, I believe in constitutional democracy. Socialist, I believe in universal health care. I believe in free education for everybody from start to finish. I believe in a Social Security pension that a person could retire at an early age, or even going further, I believe in UBI from birth to death, and creating a comfortable baseline where people could worry about the environment or whatever, monitor politics, be an awakened and aware polis. And Democratic Socialist Libertarian, I do believe in people should be able to start businesses in a fair, ethical playing field. I think that, that is, human beings have had commerce. We've been buying and trading and selling for so many years. I think you have to have some place for capitalism, but capitalism has the potential to turn violent, as we're seeing in our society with the wars for profit and all that shit. And then it's existed throughout history. You really have to have safeguard mechanisms for capitalism, and then gentlemen play on a playing field, like in sports. And you have rules. The ref is not bribed, and let's have real competition if that's what you want. And even protections in place when somebody has too much of an advantage where it no longer becomes fair. So libertarian, I also believe in decriminalization of all drugs, decriminalization of sex work. I believe in free speech, all the Bill of Rights, strong civil liberties advocate. And, regardless of race, creed, color, everybody who's a citizen of the United States is treated fairly. Everybody's equal. People obviously have their own personal viewpoints, but the law recognizes everybody equally, regardless of socioeconomic status. It's a fair deal. And, that's pretty much it.
Okay.
And do those align? Do any of those things align with your own perspective?
I mean, like philosophically, yeah, I think so. I don't know, like effectively, if we would go about it in the same way, but yeah, I think for the most part, we kind of line up there. Yeah.
You think and that's where I guess we differed. You think maybe it's an authoritarian system that could lead us there because they don't have to go through all the red tape.
Yeah, I don't know if I would agree doing an authoritarian system. I don't personally like the idea of living under an authoritarian system, but maybe that might be the most efficient way to do it. Yeah, I don't know, but
Yeah, heavy. So if an authoritarian system comes down, how will you go with it all the way? Let's say, it's Nazi Germany. And it's more efficient, and there is a hurt minority, which we agreed exists in these scenarios. Would you be down with an authoritarian system? How would you deviate? Would you try and escape? Would you go with the program? How would you deal with it? Or would you try and exist in it as best you could for your own core survival?
yeah, I would do whatever I need to for me and my family to survive is what I would do.
dig it.
Yeah, I'm not about to throw my kid under the bus to resist the state or anything. But I would hope that in that case, I would probably find a way to leave. Or I would hope that the United States is far enough away from that. We're not about to flip the Nazi switch real quick or something. Although we're getting close with some of our immigrants on the border. So
yeah, you could make an analogy to concentration camps.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is with these border, a lot of people don't know, or some people may not know, these border prisons for immigrants are for profit. So once again, we get back to capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
These have been outsourced to private corporations. And now you have a financialized incentive to create this whole network of gulags for kids.
Sure.
In some cases. And now I ask you, these children have no constitutional rights. What is going on in these children's prisons? Is there any monitoring? How are these children being treated? There seems to be a great potential for abuse. This system seems really sick. And once again, you got to tie it back to the financialization because there's financial incentive.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if it's the financial incentive that has as much to do with it as much as Republicans just tend to not really care about brown people as much, but
that's true.
that might be.
There is a history of racism.
Yeah.
Although if you go back, the Dixiecrats used to be racist and then they flipped it with Nixon. But do you think racism is a major issue in this country as well?
Not as major as it used to be, but yeah, I definitely think it's still a pretty big issue. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And do you think it's going in the right direction or the wrong direction? As far as, do you think race relations are getting better or worse?
Race relations are definitely getting better, but there are still problems. Well, maybe with Trump as of recently, you could argue that maybe they have taken a reverse direction, but I would hope that things are still getting better. I guess we'll see in the coming years how much this has impacted things.
Right on. Yeah. We'll see. There's been a real heavy history of severe racism in the United States pertaining to Native Americans and African Americans. So this country is definitely foundationally has some heavy legacy of racism to deal with. And in its most extreme form.
For sure.
Yeah. So, all right. So it sounds like you're comfortable in that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Is there any issues that you are passionate about that you want to mention? And then I guess we could wrap it up. Is there something that you really have a core passion?
Man, I don't know. Right now, I guess we're just kind of keeping up with the election stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I don't know if there's anything that I'm too. I guess as of recently, a lot of my content is revolved around socialism and communism. Mm-hmm. So I've been dealing with a lot of that recently, but I don't know. I don't really enjoy those conversations much.
So socialism and communism. So I'm assuming you take the capitalist side of the argument.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not a big fan of I think that central planning and all of that is kind of a big joke. I don't agree with that at all. Yeah. But
yeah, so I agree in this sense. If you look at any country that is 100% socialist or purports or communism, they have all devolved into pretty brutal totalitarian systems. If you look at the Soviet Union, if you look at China, even though you may consider it a success today, you had tens of millions of people who were killed under Mao. And state power, it gets back to what I said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if you give all that, if you cede that power to a corporation, or if you see that
government
power
or state,
or government, it really gets back to checks and balances. You have to have some kind of regulatory or counter interest groups keeping things from tilting to more than one side.
Yeah. I think I agree. Anytime you get too big a centralization of power into one area, it can probably lead to like bad things happening. Yeah.
So maybe the answer is decentralization of power, where you have small, because there was a study done, and in groups over 150, you could have democracy because when people are in small groups and they know each other, they share,
Mm-hmm.
their inclination is to act in more in cooperation.
Yeah.
Once you get above,
The
yes.
only problem with the democracy thing is the inefficiencies, right? Is the problems we talked about earlier.
Well, in a small group, they are efficient because you're dealing on a micro level, not this
Oh,
giant.
sure.
So
But
once you
then,
go over a group of 150,
mm-hmm.
that's when the chaos starts, what you're talking about.
Sure. But it doesn't seem like there's much we can do about that, right? Like the world is so huge today that.
Well, decentralization would be where, let's say I live on a neighborhood, right? I live in a neighborhood. I'm in New York City. So my neighborhood, we kind of input about what's going on in our personal experience. We, our sidewalks, our posts, whatever. We kind of create the flavor, or maybe, and then you have this neighborhoods or sections. The small. I'm not saying it could be 100, maybe a little larger than 150, but you have people who are dealing one school district or one school in that little zone. These people who live in this area know what the kind of environment they want to create, and they put in that input. And
yeah,
but
the
decentralized system.
At some point, you have to have all of this power like collected somewhere, right? Otherwise, these people would be vulnerable to outside forces.
Oh yeah. So there you have a larger collection, but when you pipe down the resources, the local population, has a say. But you could even eliminate that with solar energy. Let's say New York. I'm going to use New York as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Why couldn't New York City, where I live, why couldn't we produce our own crops? You want to make a lower carbon imprint on the planet, which I think you do through your argument of globalization. What if we grew our crops here? We had skyscrapers filled with hydroponic plants.
Well, because if anything, because it's usually more efficient to do things at scale, right? Like you want like large crop areas rather than every individual person doing it. The problem is if you start doing it on individual levels, that usually, paradoxically, it seems paradoxical, but like generally like the smaller farming stuff is actually usually way more harmful to the environment than like the large, massive farming operations. The individual ones tend to use way more land. They tend to use inefficient farming methods that are more harmful to the environment. Like,
well, I've seen a lot of documentaries about factory farming, particularly in the meat industry, and they seem extremely harmful.
Sure, but it can be extremely harmful, but the individual farming can be just as harmful or more so as well. I mean, maybe that's something that I can investigate further, but like, as far as I understand it, like the individual farming practices are generally worse for the environment than like than the big factory farms.
See, I've heard the exact opposite. I've heard small organic farming is more. Now, I can't pull the data, so I'll have to
that's fine.
look. But what the sources I've read says that it's the exact opposite. So I guess we can't take any further. But
sure.
It seems all right. So let's even say that. So let's say we could build technology to have these plants being grown locally in this skyscraper, and there's no solar power. Why would it be better to outsource that when you could do it locally and create jobs for the local energy grid and also for that agriculture?
I mean, like, so again, like there's a lot of things to do with here. So firstly, creating jobs, I don't think is a good idea to do anything because you can literally make any job in the world to create jobs. Like, so for instance, we could ban vacuum cleaners and make it so people go around with little hand things. Like that would create tons of jobs just because you create jobs.
I'm saying using the latest technology of agribusiness.
Yeah. But like, so I was just getting that out of the way. So if you create jobs as something that's never good or bad, that's just a thing that happens. I don't think that creating jobs is like a goal of any program. It shouldn't be. When you talk about like growing crops like locally, it just like, as far as I understand, like growing things locally is just always way less efficient than doing things at scale. That if I could grow crops in every single building in New York City, versus just having a massive fucking field like 100 miles away and growing them there and then importing them, that massive field is going to be way more efficient, better for the environment, better for planning. Like,
how is it better for the environment? Because you're using trucks, airplanes, all kinds of.
Because I'm pretty sure even when you take into account like shipping, it's just going to be way easier than trying to do like hydroponics indoors. That like the planning for all of that, like you're going to be losing out. So let's say that you do that for like 100 buildings, right? You're going to need like a whole new building just to make up for the space that you lost with all of those mini hydroponics things.
Well, that's an interesting statement because in Manhattan, there are gigantic skyscrapers the size of the World Trade Center. and those are owned by most of the time you'll see they're vacant. They're owned by as offshore, in safe harbors for a lot of oligarchs in China. So we have this giant uninhabited skyscraper for a few people who aren't really utilizing it. We have the space. It is just the application, and that gets back to you talked about applicable ethics. That's a perfect example. It's the way everything's being applied.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, I guess then maybe I would have to see the numbers, but like my understanding of this is that like as a general economic principle, like dividing stuff up into smaller groups and then doing it that way is usually far less efficient than just having like, essential, like this is like the whole deal of like an economy of scale, is that like when you do things at scale, it's just way more efficient in every sense of the word, and you can massively outcompete and outproduce people that are doing things in like a divided manner. That's like my understanding of things.
Well, I don't, I'm not in a position to give you numbers, but let's just take it from a logical standpoint. If I have a seed, well, let's say I have a tomato, and I want to move it an inch, or I want to move it 12 inches. Isn't, just from a logic of universal efficiency, isn't it more efficient to move it the inch?
Sure.
And that would be locally produced. You're moving it there. Everything is closer. It's vertical integration. You're doing everything from my viewpoint, in a more efficient manner. The closer.
Yeah, but there's more at play here. So what would be more efficient? Like me fixing my pipes, or me paying some other guy to drive all the way to my place to lug all of his tools over here for him to fix my pipes, right?
Yeah, but the pipes have to be fixed. You could fix the pipes in New Delhi or Indonesia or China.
Sure. Well, I'm just saying
pipes have to be fixed. So
yeah, I'm just saying that
globally you have the same expense.
Yeah, I'm just saying that like it's not just a matter of transporting. Like let's say that like it costs more to transport a tomato from A to B, but if we were to talk about the difference in time and cost and energy that goes into growing a tomato, if it's like 10 times cheaper in one area and 10 times more efficient in one area, and it's going to cost twice as much to ship it, well then it makes the math work out.
But if we we were talking about technology and innovation. I think today we're putting out satellites. We're doing some amazing shit. Why we couldn't grow an efficient hydroponic system where a mango could be grown anywhere in the world, or a pineapple? I believe that technology exists. I mean, I think in real time, we could make that scenario happen. Or if you're in an environment, because we're running out of space. So we need to start turning stuff.
Well, I don't think we're running out of space. We got a lot of space in the United States.
We have space, but it's becoming polluted space. So in America, I would challenge you to show me one body of water that's not polluted with toxins of some level. We're running out of good soil that's not poisoned. And we're also climatically, I know a farmer in Belize, talk about off-grid organic farming. We are not hearing the full extent of the climatic catastrophe in Central America. We are going to have a wave of migrants. And that's one of the reasons they have a lot of motives for building the wall, but climate change is really fucking everybody up. So if we had locally grown produce, we would be immune to all these catastrophic events, especially if it was hydroponic and it could be protected from these outside elements and situations.
I mean, if there's like some technological innovation that these things would require that would make it possible, then yeah, I mean, I'd probably be in favor of it. I'm just not aware of those innovations at this time.
Well, just given the innovations we have, if you compare what we're doing with cell phones and virtual, games, and all kinds, aerospace, I think it's a reasonable assumption if NASA wanted to put something like that together, it would be doable, or in a very short amount of time. Something like the Manhattan Project, where in the United States they built the atomic bomb, in a very short amount of time because they put the best scientists in a very enclosed area, right? And you could do amazing things if there is a will behind it. If there is a will, I think what I said is completely reasonable.
It's possible, yeah. I don't know 100% if
I'm not
that's
saying 100%,
enough.
but I'm saying there's a high probability that.
Yeah, I mean, if these theoretical technologies could be created that would allow us to do this, then I would be in favor of it. But this is gated behind those technologies coming.
All right, so to convert you from a globalist to a localist, if you saw technologies that made efficient production in a localized community, you would switch over to that side.
Yeah, if it was more efficient, yeah, for sure. I'm all about the efficiencies, but yeah.
All right. Well, I don't think either of us have enough data on, but that's interesting. So you have some wiggle room in that regards.
Yeah, of course. I'm not married to any of the ideas that I have. Like, I don't care about like free speech or capitalism or any of these things like intrinsically, like by their own virtues. I'm just more interested in like, well, what makes like most people better off? And so like if localism is better than globalism, then I would be in favor of that.
Well, you're jumping. See, even though you don't want to get involved in metaphysical philosophy, you keep jumping back because now you're into like, does the end, well, that's ethical philosophy.
Yeah, this is normative ethics. Do the end justify the means?
You're right. We're not going into like a transcendent kind of
transcendental argument. Sure.
Transcendental. Sorry. Yeah, we're not going to that transcendentalism. We are going into that. So into that realm, do the ends justify the means? So whatever you have to do to accomplish that, is that you have to do what you got to do?
Basically, yeah, that's generally what I'm in favor of. Yeah, whatever like makes more people better off and happier and all that shit. It's usually what I'm in favor of. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good. I mean, I agree. I guess the difficulty is, to me, I see globalism making the situation worse. I think it's polluting more of the planet. I think it's taking away jobs. Let me give you an example. In Nigeria, there's a problem with Boko Haram. We hear about the terrorism in Nigeria, right? They're kidnapping the girls. You've seen those news stories, Boko Haram, right?
Okay.
Am I giving you data you're not familiar with?
I mean, I've heard of like all sorts of like sex trafficking stuff that happens all over.
Well, this is separate. This is where you have. All right, so you have these guys who are, we hear about, Al Qaeda, right?
I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
So it's like an Al Qaeda in Nigeria.
Okay.
And what happened was, there used to be a strong textile industry in Nigeria.
Okay.
And so you had local employment. And China came in and said, we'll do all these deals with you. We'll build you some roads. We'll build you some vanity projects. We'll give you the dictator $1 billion to a Swiss bank account and his military. This is soft neo. This is not what we do with hard neoliberalism. This is neoconservatism, maybe. This is neoliberalism as practiced in the 90s. Okay. And so all of a sudden they're flooding the market with cheap Chinese goods because you said cheaper is better. If the consumer could get a lower price good, it's better for society. The problem is all those guys who worked in those textile mills were suddenly unemployed. Now who comes along and starts giving them food? This radical fundamental Islamic group. And we'll feed you these young unemployed men who are pissed off. And now they take them in and now you have a radical terrorism problem. And that started with that whole globalism thing. That's an example of real world. That's what I mean. I don't see it's benefiting. I don't see how it's benefiting people. Instead of letting those Nigerians grow their own crops, create a stable society, not have foreign corporations coming in and stealing all the oil, but actually a society benefiting itself because when they deal locally, they know what's in its best interest. A corporation on the other side of the world doesn't know what's good for that local community. That's, you kind of understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand that there are potential downsides, but I mean, like you also have positives where there might be communities where instead of people like having to learn how to manufacture microprocessors to make phones, another country does it for them. And now they can do other jobs that they think are more benefiting like for them. Right. So like there are definitely downsides to things being exported sometimes, but there are also upsides as well. Right. Like I'm sure that like for every downside story I can find an upside story. It's just, I mean, like every policy you implement, there are going to be goods and bads and you have to find a way to manage the bads while capitalizing on the goods.
Were you for the TPP?
Yeah, I think so. Generally, yeah.
All right. So let's get back to your problem of
Oh, just to be real quick, I have about 6 minutes that I do have to go.
We'll wrap it up, man.
Okay, yeah.
All right. So real quick, the TPP would have taken down a lot of corporate regulations a lot of sovereign nation regulations as far as polluting. And you're worried about...
I disagree with that. I don't think so.
Right. Why do you disagree?
So what the TPP did was it basically gave you the ability as a corporation to sue a country if they were to try to put some regulation in place that you felt was bullshit. If you felt like they were just doing it just to mess with your company rather than like an actual environmental concern, that's kind of what it was pointing towards.
The problem with that is the people who would arbitrate that would be a special court panel. Court panel would be composed of corporate lawyers. And let me just give you an example. So let's say a company is dumping toxins in my water supply. I sue that, or the state tries to, they stop the company from doing that. The company could go back and sue that state for lost profits, and that's being adjudicated in a corporate court.
Well, so the court isn't corporate. No. So the court isn't corporate. The court it's an ISDS panel, and both sides get to nominate one person to make a decision, and then the third person is nominated by both sides as well. They have to agree on it. So the court isn't like a corporate court. The court is like a panel basically that both sides get to decide on.
It's fair to say the corporate side would pick people who are corporate friendly.
Yeah, but the state would pick sides that are state friendly. Right.
And you don't think any of those state representatives would be subject to influence? And even given the fact that I just pointed out with the example.
Well, if they are subject to it, that's the state's fault. They get to literally choose the people, right?
Right. So that's the real world we live in. I just made that point earlier about the FDA being run by former corporate heads.
Well, yeah, but if you think those are the problems there, then that has nothing to do with the TPP. You think that the
TPP would take a corrupt system, and they would let the arbitration get handled by corrupt people. Because we've already established that the state is already corrupted by corporate influence. So even if you draw people from that body, you're still going to have a corporate-friendly judiciary.
Yeah, I mean, that's possible, but I mean, like, you can't, I mean, that would be like saying every single policy a country does is bad because there are problems in the country itself. So like, we can talk about whether or not we think some corporations have too much control over politics without saying that makes everything like the TPP and everything else bad as a result of that, right? So like, I agree that maybe corporations have too much influence in some political arenas, but that doesn't mean that every single policy then that a state enacts like the TPP is going to be bad necessarily because of that, right?
But it does give, sorry, there's alarms out. It does give, but you admit it does give corporations the right to skirt around pollution regulations. And you said earlier that you thought the ecological catastrophe that we're facing is the most imminent existential threat. Would the TPP accelerate environmental destruction, giving states or nation states less rights to regulate their environmental policies?
Yeah, I mean, it could, but I mean, like, not having the TPP isn't like it's helping us much, right? Like, I mean, like, I think we need to do things to remedy the environmental damage we're causing right now, but I don't think the TPP is going to be a part of that, like whether we do or don't.
Okay, so, all right, so I don't know. Other people have to analyze. So you would still go for it if if Obama was still in power, you would have been happy if it would have been passed.
Yeah, I think it would have been a good thing. Yeah.
Okay.
It would have been a good thing for like trade policy, maybe not necessarily for like environmental damage. Like,
well,
but
the
that's
environmental damage. To me, I think that's more of an existential threat because now you're talking famines, refugee crises, some major destabilization, lack of water for the planet.
Sure.
All right, and I'm going to wrap it up because I think I probably lost track of time, so I forgot 6 minutes. It was really cool talking to you. Thank you for, I strive for more of a dialectical argument. To me, the goal is let's find the truth. And if the truth is the truth, let go of, don't hold on to it. Don't get into sophistry or a rhetoric game. What is the truth? And if your truth is more transcendent, I'll, let that go and, I'll dig what you're saying. And that's what I think free speech is about. That's why we have to be able to talk freely and I think kind of work towards solutions. That's my viewpoint.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Well, hey, I appreciate the conversation, buddy. It's been fun.